This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode number 360, a Backdrop CMS case study. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about Backdrop CMS with Eric Toupin. Eric is a senior developer with Atom Design Group and has been working with Drupal off and on for about 10 years. Eric, welcome to the show and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
I'm Nick Laughlin. Today my co-hosts are, as usual, John Picozzi, a solutions architect at EPAM.
Hello, internet friends.
Also joining us for the next 4 weeks as guest host is Kathy Thays, support team manager at Lullabot. Kathy is a longtime Drupal contributor. She helped the Drupal mentoring program at conferences scale up and also worked a bunch on getting Drupal 8 released. She's currently working as the support team manager at Lullabot in the support and maintenance department, where she wears a lot of hats, sometimes a team lead, sometimes a project manager, and sometimes still a developer.
Yep,
welcome
accurate.
To the show. Session submissions are open for the New England Drupal camp. And here's Stephen to tell us a little bit more.
The New England Drupal camp is back in person at Rhode Island College in November. NedCamp, as we call it, is a 2-day Drupal camp, Friday being a training day and Saturday sessions. Session submissions are now open. New presenters are encouraged and welcome. Did you know Nick and John are camp founders and are still on the organizing team? Join John and Nick and the other New England Drupalers in November. You can learn more. Visit nedcamp.org.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for that. And definitely looking forward to New England Drupal camp this year. Moving on, we do have a new module of the week. And this is inspired by some discussion that we've been having in the Talking Drupal Slack for the show. There's been some discussion about translation and how to inform a user if they are clicking on a link that's taking them to a different language. So if you have, say, an English and Spanish site, they're on the Spanish version of the site, and there's a link that goes to an English off-site page or an internal page that's in English. How do you let the users know? And so that discussion turned towards Hreflang attributes. So there is a module called Hreflang, and that module helps fill in a couple of gaps in the Drupal handling of content translation. So currently, Drupal only provides Hreflang attributes on content entity pages. So there's a bunch of pages in Drupal that may be missing that. And so this allows you to add it to all your pages and fix some of the Google Webmaster Tool errors you may be getting. John, I think you have some experience with this module, right?
I do, yeah. So I've used this before for a multi-region, multi-language site to basically assist in SEO and help Google basically understand what page they were looking at and what the canonical for that page was. So that's another use case there for Hreflang is SEO betterment, I guess.
Very good. So moving on to our primary topic, we've talked about Backdrop CMS in the past. It was one of our first episodes, episode 17. And then we kind of have a pattern of every 101 episodes. So episode 17, 218, and 319 were all about Backdrop if you want to go back and listen to those. But for our listeners that have not listened to those episodes yet, Eric, can you give us a quick overview of what Backdrop is?
Sure. Backdrop CMS, kind of as it says in the name, is a content management system. It's a fork of Drupal 7, or began as a fork of Drupal 7 a very long time ago. And today it is its own self-contained content management system with its own security team, its own core team, its own contrib team. And I think primarily the reason that you might consider using something like Backdrop is because it solves the Drupal 7 upgrade problem, because there is an upgrade in place from Drupal 7 to Backdrop CMS. There's plenty of other cool things about Backdrop, but I think that's kind of the hot topic for it now.
So, Eric, how did you first hear about Backdrop? And then how did you become interested in Backdrop?
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I don't have an exact memory of. So I remember a long time ago messing around with Backdrop on my own time for my own Drupal 7 project. So I have all kinds of like, I've been working in technology for 15, 20 years and have all kinds of tools that I built for myself personally or for projects, all in Drupal 7 recently. And Backdrop seemed like a good solution for those. So I think that was the first time that I was introduced to it. And then how did I kind of start working with it? With this project that we're going to talk a little bit about in a moment here with Stanford's research and information technology and innovation team. Actually, Zach Chandler, the director of that team, suggested it as an option to investigate when we were looking at Drupal 7 upgrade paths. And that was last year, middle of last year. I do know that at that time I'd heard about it. And so my reaction was, oh yeah, I've heard about that. Let's look into it. And things kind of left off from there.
Who's Zach Chandler? Is he like a stakeholder?
Yeah, so Zach is the director of research, information technology, and innovation at Stanford University. And along with a couple of other projects, some major flagship projects for his department are the two websites that we maintain, that Design Group maintains, and also we built, called Solo and Seed Funding. Solo is Stanford on and off campus learning opportunities, and Seed Funding is just what it sounds like, seed funding.
Yeah. I wonder if maybe like he might have heard about it at a local Stanford camp or something, and then like it filtered back down to you through that.
It's very possible. I know that Zach himself is a longtime Drupal person, and I think he would kind of in a self-described way say more of a fiddler than a developer. But I know that he has some kind of relationship with Jen and Nate, who are both pretty deeply involved in Backdrop. And so it's likely that it came from there, although Stanford does have a webcamp every year where they talk about Drupal stuff and Backdrop up there.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about Design? Like what type of clients do you usually work with? Like, I wonder if this particular project that went with Backdrop, how that compares.
Yeah, I think it's about in line with the sorts of clients that we seek and the sorts of clients that seek us. We talk a lot about working with mission-driven clients and clients who make an impact. I may speak like a tiny bit out of turn here. So my brother, Justin Toupin, is the CEO of Design Group. And I have been working with him for a very long time, for around 15 years off and on. The agency's been around for like 22. And a huge part of his dream from the beginning was to work with people telling important stories that needed to be told. And often what that translates into is the people that really have a powerful mission that drives their organization. So we've worked with, obviously, Stanford University, also Human Rights Watch, a couple of other universities, World Wildlife Fund, definitely always pushing for clients that are really focused on mission. So I think Stanford fits right in there. Higher education, NGO, nonprofit are our biggest profiles, I think.
And for our listeners, we had Justin on the show, episode 337, to talk about layout paragraphs, if you want to hear more about that.
I was wondering if you could give a little bit more background on the kind of work that you're doing with Stanford. Like in particular, I'm curious, it sounds like you're moving some sites from Drupal 7 to Backdrop. Do you have other Drupal projects? Like if you were doing a new site, would you consider Backdrop? Would you just go Drupal 9? What does that?
Yeah, so the two websites that we'll primarily talk about, Solo and Seed Funding, are at their core opportunity offering websites. And there's two different audiences. So the one for Solo, which is on and off campus learning opportunities, is directed at Stanford students. And that is for them to apply to educational opportunities all over the world that help to enrich their education experience at Stanford University. So the application process includes student records, writing essays, filling out forms, getting travel paperwork together, whatever the case may be. And the platform manages those workflows all the way from the inception where an opportunity is advertised on the site. Then a student goes and clicks on it. They fill out an application. The application gets reviewed. It gets sent to third-party reviewers. They collect recommendation letters, this whole workflow process. that results in either being told, thanks for your application, but not this time, or you're good to go, and now you need to prepare for travel, and here's the steps to do that. And there's a whole nother workflow based on that.
And was that, just out of curiosity, previous to Backdrop and working with that, and was that all managed in Drupal 7?
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah, so they were managing these processes in disparate software solutions that were different for every department. And the dream of the Reedy team was to unite this into a single platform for the entire university. And they came to us with that idea 7 years ago. And we said, let's build an MVP, a minimal viable product, in Drupal 7 and see what happens. I built that MVP. I've been the lead developer on these 2 projects since then. And so we built those technologies over the course of 7 years in ongoing cyclic 3-week to 4-week sprints, releasing new features basically every month for this entire 7-year window. Just recently, like everyone, we ran into the Drupal 7 problem. And so that's what inspired the Backdrop conversations and the eventual conversion to Backdrop, which we launched in January.
Yeah, so all this logic is like in Drupal, and you're like, we need to do something with this site. What are we going to do with it? Like it's not external to the Drupals.
That's right. We kind of encoded this process, not just at a software level, but also at an organizational level for Stanford. Like, how do people apply for opportunities we are hoping to define with our platforms?
So I'm going to be the Backdrop naysayer for a second here, I think. This sounds like this project is in Drupal 7. It sounds like kind of like a perfect solution for like Drupal or to be ported to Drupal 9, right? Because like the future of Drupal is like external data coming in and having Drupal manage it and do things with it, right? And being kind of extensible to Drupal 10, 11, 12 into the future, right? So why, other than like the obvious, like it was Drupal 7, so the move to Backdrop was easy. What were the other reasons Backdrop was the right choice for this project? And more specifically, I guess, how long had Backdrop been like out and established before you started considering it?
Yeah, all really, really great questions. And I think a natural reaction to where the projects were. You mentioned other than it being like, hey, this is Drupal 7 and upgrading to Backdrop is really easy. And I think that I would say that is the primary reason, but that it's a lot more nuanced than that. So there's a couple of things going on here. And when we say something's a lot easier, we mean that it requires less resources. And so if we're talking about, and I think we were in general terms, somewhere between 700,000 and beyond for a total cost to move to Drupal 9, compared to less than 90,000 to move to Backdrop, that's a major consideration. Yeah. And if you have that money to invest elsewhere in your program, assuming that your website isn't the only thing, like it doesn't live in an island, right? You have, you want to hire more people for your team. You want to build support for the product throughout Stanford. If you want to redistribute resources, certainly this gives you some options there. Yeah. Another one would be timeline. So I think another thing that we imply when we talk about whether something is hard or easy is how long it's going to take. So for Solo and for seed funding, we release features every month. So if we're going to take 5 or 6 months with a 4-person team or a 5-person team to build something in Drupal 9, what happens to regular release cycles? And what happens to our engagement with our stakeholders who are really used to requesting features, getting them back? So do we keep a Drupal 7 product going and also build a Drupal 9 product and try to get the Drupal 9 one to catch up with the Drupal 7 one for those 6 months gap? That gets a little bit complicated. So Backdrop, again, seemed to be a much better solution for that. We were, quote unquote, offline for closer to 2 months.
Oh, wow. So you took 2 release cycles to upgrade from Drupal 7 to Backdrop versus a 6-month, 3-year rebuild in Drupal 9.
Yeah, that's basically right. So we did we used all of October, November, and December of last year, but the majority of December is a vacation block for Stanford. And so we kind of got that for free. It kind of lined up well for us. We ended up actually taking a lot of that time off ourselves. So in total, it was a 10-week process.
Wow.
At arguably 15% of the cost it would have been for Drupal 9. This morning at like 4 a.m., I released our 68th release on solo and seed funding with new features for our stakeholders. And that's what we wanted. We wanted to get back to, we didn't want to take 6 months to rebuild. We wanted to release new features and keep releasing them and not worry about these security implications.
And then just following up on that, what was the timeline as far as like Backdrop's maturity and the decision to switch to this, right?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, when I discovered Backdrop, which was, not super long ago, like a year and a half or something, I had the impression that it was new because I had not heard of it. But it's actually been around for a super long time. They've had stable releases for like 70 years, I think.
The first release was January 15th, 2015.
Yeah, there you go. So by the time we were releasing in January of 2022, that would have been around 7 years of stable releases. Yeah.
So it was pretty mature.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Backdrop is smaller than Drupal in terms of community. And I think a lot of people bring that up. A lot of people are like, oh, but what if the community is not going to support the work? And I think what's really interesting there is, first of all, it's been stable for 7 years. So if you look at the size, the growth of the community, there's always been, a security team, the core and contrib team hover around 100 contributors at all points through those 7 years. But then I think what a lot of people ignore is that the Drupal community is the Backdrop community. The API is so similar in Backdrop version 1 that any Drupal 7 developer can absolutely support a Backdrop site. So you're not short of developer resources.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to pick up. I'm wondering, are there any, going the other way around, are there any features in Backdrop CMS that Drupal does not have? Right? Because you're talking about it's similar and it's easy to pick up, and it, but have you found maybe in your new project is some cool things in Backdrop that, Drupal doesn't have?
Yeah. A couple of things jump to mind, and it depends on whether you're comparing with Drupal 7 or Drupal 9. I think compared to Drupal 7, the answer is clearly yes. There are many things that Backdrop offers that Drupal 7 did not. Configuration and code, and it's super clean. Configuration literally read out of JSON files. There's no intermediate database stage. Import is a much simpler process. That's super cool. And it's really easy to keep complex config in repository, which is awesome. The caching system was rebuilt in Backdrop. I don't know from a technical standpoint how this might compare with Drupal 9 performance, but Backdrop out of the box is about 33% more performant than Drupal 7 out of the box.
Okay.
So revamped caching system. Layouts is a pretty big deal in Backdrop, which is a new approach to building layouts and applying templates and applying styles. Basically, this is like constructing regions on a page, all with a GUI, and then dragging and dropping blocks into those regions on a page. Very similar to panels in Drupal, but a little bit more powerful and a little bit more capacity for defining specific contexts. Those are the ones that jump out. Config and code, caching system, and layout system compared to Drupal 7.
Yeah. What about Drupal 9 though?
Yeah, I think that's my question, because like you said, compared to Drupal 7, I mean, that was kind of the core mission of Backdrop, right? Get a lot of the features from Drupal 8 on a Drupal 7 procedural kind of hook-based system, but it's been stable for 7 years. We're now in Drupal 9. Are there features that Drupal 9 has that Backdrop
Can I make a
doesn't have-
guess?
Go
I want to
ahead.
make a guess. So I've been, paying a little attention to the Backdrop chatter over the years. And it seems like, tying back to what you were saying about how the Backdrop community might be smaller, but it's like built on the Drupal community, so like it incorporates that. I do think that the Backdrop community being smaller has allowed Backdrop to make some quick innovations because the team can iterate because they're smaller. So I wonder if there might be like, I don't know, like things in the administrative UI that might be like unique to Backdrop that are cool features.
Yeah, I don't have a very satisfying answer for that question.
That's okay.
And what I mean is that I can't think of any specific features that exist in Backdrop that don't exist in Drupal 9 in terms of like administrative backend. I think one thing that's interesting about Backdrop is that there's a far smaller dependency footprint, and that a stated part of Backdrop's philosophy is to be available as an open source project, not just to developers all over the spectrum, or organizations all over the spectrum in terms of like entry cost, but that it's less complicated to work with and maintain. And so it's more available to developers with 3 years of experience instead of maybe 7 or 8 years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So what about the Drupal features that don't exist? I mean, I think the last time we had Jen on to talk about it, for example, Composer isn't supported by the core team really in Backdrop. I don't know if that's still the case, or if there's plans to change that.
It still is.
Are there other things like that the Drupal community has kind of settled on as standards that don't exist in the Backdrop community?
I don't think so. Again, not off the top of my head, Composer, like you mentioned, is not supported by the Backdrop core team as far as I know. And maybe that's something that'll come into the future of Backdrop 2.0 or 2+. But also, like I kind of mentioned a second ago, rather than seeing that as like a feature that's not available, it's a decision to create a simpler ecosystem of code to work with for entry level and medium level programmers.
Sure. Yeah.
And actually, the question about the differences between Drupal 9 and Backdrop is an extremely interesting question to me, because At Design Group works primarily in Drupal 9. And if anybody comes to us and says we want a website, our go-to answer is Drupal 9.
Sure.
But now, as we have demonstrated just in the past 6 months or so, this kind of incredible savings available if we work on moving to Backdrop instead of Drupal 9. One question we've been talking about internally quite a bit, myself with the director of engineering at Design Group, Joel Steidel, who's also a good friend of mine, is like, what really are the differences? Like, when do we recommend 9 and
Yes.
Interesting.
And it's super hard. It's a super hard question to answer. And I think, honestly, what it comes down to, and this is what everything comes down to for me in terms of development work, is what does the client want? If I go into a dealership looking for a Ford, you're not going to sell me a Toyota. I want the Ford. And if people come to us and say, hey, I want a Drupal 9 website, if that's what their mind's at and they're aware of the price differences, that seems like a great deciding factor.
Are there technical things at this point that you think would push you in one direction or the other? Other than like they have an existing Drupal 7 site, it sounds like if they have an existing complex Drupal 7 site, you would definitely lean towards just upgrading and Backdrop, presuming it's greenfield. Are there integrations or particular use cases that you think would push you one way or the other now that you've got experience in both?
And when you say greenfield project, can you tell me what you mean by that?
I just mean like a brand new website, like not an existing project. Like it's not on Drupal 8, it's not on Drupal 7, it's not in WordPress. It's just, here's a brand new website that I need. Are there technical things that would push you towards Backdrop over Drupal 9 or vice versa?
There's only one that I can think of, and it's pretty specific to At Design Group. And it's what my brother was talking about months ago, layout paragraphs. So layout paragraphs exists, or rather paragraphs exist in Backdrop CMS, but Atten has been working to build a tool that we're calling Mercury Editor, which is a custom installation of the layout paragraphs module and a custom theming of that module. And the idea is to build this like beautiful, seamless drag and drop authoring experience on Drupal 9 paragraphs. We really love that product, and we really love what it can do for people. And that product doesn't exist in Backdrop, but that's an Atten thing. Besides that, in terms of actual features available, I think what it comes down to is resources available. Do we have people that want to build in Drupal that are ready to go, that want a template with Twig ready to go? Or do we have people that want to build in Backdrop and are familiar with the Drupal 7 templating system? It's a little different in Backdrop, but very similar, who are ready to go.
Oh, is it PHP template or something similar to that?
It's the same, a very similar approach, which is the TPL files.
Okay.
And there's a new layer, which is a lot of the way templates are invoked is now based on the layout system.
Okay.
So extreme flexibility in the GUI and the same TPL system that you'd be used to, like node.tpl or field.whatever.tpl.
I think that's my least favorite part of working on old Drupal 7 sites. I don't know that I would enjoy it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know people that absolutely agree with you. And I also know people that feel like Twig is kind of a huge pain in the neck. And I feel like really people love to work in what they're good at. And so it has a lot to do with just like what you're best at.
I'm in both camps. Twig is painful, and so is PHP template. I think just front end and templating is painful for me. That's probably the takeaway.
I have a couple questions before I ask I have one question before I ask my actual question. It's going back to the work you guys did for Stanford. Nick had asked about limitations you saw in Backdrop, but I'm wondering, as you're progressing through the project, has there ever been an instance where you're like, I wish we had picked Drupal 9 or 10 because of this?
Okay, so again, not a super satisfying answer. I think the short answer is no.
Okay.
And some context that is useful there is that I started building these Stanford sites 7 years ago in Drupal 7, and I've been doing it ever since, and as a full-time job. So I'm extremely comfortable in Drupal 7 and specifically in the infrastructure that we've built. And so if some other system was able to step in and magically solve extremely specific problems that are unique to us, I mean, that's never going to happen, right? We've already worked so hard for years to solve most of those problems. So I don't think anyone else would say that. I don't think anyone else would say, oh, Backdrop magically solves or Drupal 7 magically solves things that Drupal 9 doesn't. It's just that we've been working in this infrastructure for so long. We've already built so many solutions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
So piggybacking off another one of Nick's questions, right? He talked about kind of like the preference on a greenfield site, like Backdrop versus Drupal, right? Yeah. I'm wondering if somebody has a Drupal 7 site specifically, how do you determine if Backdrop is the right fit instead of them moving to like Drupal 9 or 10, depending on when?
That's a great question. And we're in the process of building like an organizational opinion on this. We actually have a webinar series coming up in the next couple of weeks and months about how to think about moving from Drupal 7 and where you might move to. One thing that I think is probably the deciding factors, first of all, if the client has a specific say, like if they want something, if they want Drupal 9 or they want Backdrop, that has a lot of weight. Another thing is when you're thinking about building a website, if you're more excited about, man, what a great opportunity this represents, where can we go with this? Where can we go with this rebuild? Maybe Drupal 9. Drupal 9 is going to be around for a long time. There's a ton of shops that are working really hard to diversify it, to build tons of modules and stuff for it. And if you're excited about spending the money and the time to take advantage of the opportunity of change, maybe Drupal 9 is the way to go. On the other hand, if you like the way things are, and if really change is kind of dismaying, you're like, ugh, why do we have to upgrade our site? This is a pain in the neck. This already does everything I want. Well, then Backdrop is a clear win.
Interesting. That actually kind of puts a finger on something that I hadn't thought of before. I mean, that's a really clear way of putting it. Like if you're, because there are a lot of really mature sites on Drupal 7 that haven't migrated yet because, like you said, they solve, like all the problems are solved. The workflow is there, the information is there, the architecture is there. And the only thing that's not going to be there starting the end of next year is Drupal 7 security support.
Right.
Which really is truly the problem that Backdrop set out to solve in the first place, is get like some get security coverage, get some Drupal 8 features, but keep it in the Drupal 7 way and make that upgrade as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like when you are so like you've got this site you're working on, you've been working on for 7 years, right? What about like other Backdrop sites? Like you mentioned you're thinking about, you know, organizational, like what algorithm you're going to use for picking things, but like have you had any other Backdrop sites that you've worked on, or like clients at Atten?
Yeah, good question. We have no other concrete Backdrop clients at this moment. I personally have worked in Backdrop on a couple of different projects. However, we did this in January. We started talking about it a month or two after, March-ish, starting in Stanford WebCamp, and really talking about it because for me, my drive always is just what's best for clients. And so this was a real exciting solution to me because we were able to spend 10 weeks to upgrade this massive platform. And right after we started talking about it, we started getting calls about Backdrop. So we are absolutely in plenty of conversations with folks that are in a similar boat, that are looking for similar solutions, but they haven't matured yet. We haven't, begun those projects. Those are all just kind of in the works.
Interesting. So one of the things that has kind of been in the back of my mind, because like you said, Backdrop has been mature and like has had a full release for 7 years. It's been around for longer. I mean, our first show, episode 17, would have been 9 years ago at this point. Do you consider it its own CMS at this point, or does it still really just feel like a fork of Drupal 7 or like a Drupal 9 that's doing it like behind the scenes in a Drupal 7 way? Does it still feel like that fork, or is it its own project at this point?
Okay, so speaking just from my own and somewhat narrow perspective, yes, it absolutely feels like its own content management system. There are some caveats there. I think that to me, the Backdrop CMS layout system is exciting and new and flexible, but it is apparently based on and very similar to panels. And so maybe folks that have a lot of experience with panels, which I didn't, would be like, oh, this is familiar. This is a lot like Drupal 7. Whereas I don't feel that way. I feel like, oh, this is a Backdrop thing. Same with configuration and code. I worked on a couple of Drupal 8 projects for a while before I was kind of full-time on these two solo and seed funding. And configuration and code was nice, but it still felt like there were some complex steps. There's active configuration versus passive configuration. I don't know the term there. And that process for migrating from code into database. Whereas on Backdrop, everything is just in files. And so unless your JSON code implies a schema change that has to take place in the database, unless something has to take place in the database, the config is literally in the file. You change the file, the config is changed.
Can you expand on how that works? Because I know that originally that was the plan in Drupal as well. And there was a lot of, I think the reason why they went with the other method was performance. I mean, just reading directly from the file system was a major performance problem in the Drupal 8 the Drupal 8 release process. So that's why they switched to the import. Do you find that that's an issue in Backdrop, or do you know that they solve that a different way so that it isn't a problem?
Yes, it is an issue that we have solved in our own way. This is an interesting topic, actually.
Okay.
So our platforms that we recently released in Backdrop are extremely complicated, and they're also extremely mature to the point where, you know, how when you look at a 10-year-old Drupal 7 site, there's like 40 content types and like, you know, all the crap that happens after 10 years of development. So we do a pretty good job of refactoring and keeping things clean, but we're definitely an older platform with a lot of those complications. Yep. So we have tons of configuration reads that a more brochure style site or a simpler site would not have. And so a lot of Backdrop folks that are building simpler sites are not seeing performance issues whatsoever. We were for two reasons. One, maturity of the site means tons more configuration. And two, we decided to host on Pantheon. Pantheon is awesome. Pantheon's great, but, which is where I was going. And I think the but really right now only applies to complex Backdrop CMS sites. And the problem is that Pantheon has the repo file system, which is lightning fast. And then they have the public file system, which is shared across all instances of your sites. Because, you know, multiple instances of your site are spun up to deal with traffic. And that shared file system is real slow because of that, because it's shared across multiple instances. And if you have your configuration in that shared file system, it's achingly slow. It's too slow. And that's where you would generally recommend that the configuration goes. And so what we had to do was put it only in the repository, which means that absolutely no config changes can happen on a living site.
Yeah.
And so we had to write some stuff to kind of deal with that.
There's also a side effect that you may not know. I have clients that use Pantheon extensively. That slower file system also occasionally loses files. They just disappear into the ether. This client has had to write some special processes to check and find lost files and repopulate them from backups because it just they disappear.
That's super interesting. I've not heard that.
It's not a common thing. I mean, there's some unique stuff on this project that causes that to be both noticed and happen. But I would think if that happens with a configuration file, that would be a little bit more severe than a PDF or something disappearing.
Nick, that's super interesting that you mentioned that, and maybe at some point you could share some more information about it. Now that you say it, in the last couple of months, I did have to write custom code that we did so many complex things on the sites, but one of the things that we do is generate PDFs on the fly based on like web form stuff that people fill out.
Yep.
And I did have to write code that after it writes the PDF to disk, ensures that it's written, that it's readable, and if it's not, tries it again. And I didn't know why I had to do that, just that the file wasn't there.
Yeah, we do also occasionally have to redeploy. Like if there's only one or two changes in Git, you sometimes have to do a second deployment for even the repo files to sometimes update. Like the file syncing piece just doesn't pick up those changes. So yeah, I'd be happy to share with that.
That'd be great.
Okay, so let's bring it back to Backdrop Drupal and whatnot. Wondering, so actually, I guess I have a question to piggyback again on Nick's previous question, right? Considering Backdrop its own CMS, do you feel like Backdrop is potentially detracting from Drupal in some way, like in the fact that it's it could be taking resources away from like the Drupal community, or my root question here is like, is there like a knowledge share that's happening, right? Is Backdrop detracting, or is there like an opportunity to share kind of findings and for both of them to kind of improve each other?
That's extremely interesting. I've never heard that question posed. And that's super interesting to think about, whether Backdrop could be detracting from a better development of kind of Drupal products at large. And man, that's super interesting and hard to answer succinctly. I think that hundreds of thousands of organizations were left in the lurch between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. And I think that was, I mean, I'm not super interested or super deeply involved in Drupal communities, Backdrop communities. And so I'm not sure what the decisions were that led to this, but I do know that tons of people who had relied on Drupal for a very long time and with great success did feel incredibly frustrated by the sudden need to spend so much time and money just to keep things running.
Yeah.
And so I think that maybe the actual tech minds that are working on Backdrop CMS could be tech minds that are working on Drupal 9. But I think that continues to leave so many people without good options if they can't afford a Drupal 9 upgrade in terms of resources. And so really, I feel like at the end, you know, the what do you say? Customer is king or something.
Sure.
Whoever it is that needs websites and needs their websites to work is who's directing the market. And I think that people need their Drupal 7 sites to be efficiently upgraded and continue to be usable.
Yeah.
I want to jump into that a little bit. So from what I've seen of the contribution from Backdrop and Drupal, I see a lot of crossover. I see Backdrop contributors maybe initially making their patches for their PRs and the Backdrop issue queues, and then being like, yeah, this can also apply to Drupal. Here, I'll go put it over here in the Drupal issue queue. Like, I see a lot of cross-pollination in terms of sharing solutions that may help out each projects. But I'm not super involved, so I'm just like kind of getting a hint of that.
Yeah, I think either way, excuse me. I think either way, it's the nature of open source. I mean,
Of course,
there's no denying that Drupal 8 was a huge shift. As a Drupal developer and a member of the community, I think it was a necessary change. I think making the change to rely more heavily on things like Symfony and making the change to more object-oriented stuff, I think that is a net positive in the long term, but it did cause a huge number of sites that, when I started my career, we were talking a little bit before the show, like the first time that I kind of met Kathy on IRC, there were a ton of projects that I worked on as a, really small freelancer that were, plumbers, painters, and Drupal 7, Drupal 6, Drupal 5 were great for that, or the type of project where it started out really simple and just organically grew into this complex mega application. And Drupal 8, Drupal 9, frankly, just aren't really great fits for those. Now, with Drupal 9, Drupal 10, and the Easy Out of the Box initiative, we're kind of circling back to that in the Drupal community and trying to get to a point where somebody who is a talented site builder can build these more complex sites again. But there is that 3 or 4 year gap in the Drupal world where you really have to be a developer to build Drupal sites now. You can't be a site builder. You can't just go find there's a module for that and install it. And Backdrop, I think, fills that gap for a lot of those projects that are maintained by somebody who built it organically from the ground up by adding modules. Backdrop is a way for them to kind of stay. And like you kind of hinted at, Eric, I think Backdrop is its own community, but it is tangentially still part of the Drupal community. And there is, a lot of communication back and forth, I think, between the two projects. And, maybe someday it rolls back and maybe it stays its own thing forever. Maybe it goes off. And I think Jen said some of the plan is once Drupal 7 is end of life, that's when Backdrop 2 will come out and it'll really start going in its own direction, because its primary purpose right now is that different migration pathway for maintaining your site from Drupal 7, from a Drupal 7 standpoint. But do I think it's detracting from the Drupal community in any way personally? No. I mean, like a lot of these, people, like you said, still contribute to the Drupal community, still go to camp, still talk, still give their knowledge back. And if there wasn't an option, would they stay in the Drupal community anyway? Right. I mean, that's also a question.
Yeah, right. Like,
it's a fair point.
You can't it's not rewind time here.
Yeah.
I mean, they could have a bitter taste in their mouth from the shift, right? And choose to go to somewhere else. So, I mean, this is, I think this is probably better than that alternative. Eric, bringing it back to, cross-pollination, as Kathy kind of mentioned, has the work you've done for Stanford, has any of that been able to be applied back to the Drupal project, either via patches or community involvement?
No, not that I'm aware of. We have contributed, I would say, some significant work to the Backdrop community, to Backdrop modules, but nothing back to Drupal.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't, organically happen without your involvement, with a little bit of time. But anyway,
Yeah.
So like you mentioned, Adam was thinking about heuristic for like deciding if new projects, right, the greenfield projects coming in, like what might be a good fit for helping those clients. So like, has Atten considered like Backdrop as like a service offering? Like, does it appear on the website, right? Like if we go look, does it say Atten does Backdrop work? How close are you to coming to that? Like, are people asking for it?
Yeah. Yes, people are asking for it. And yes, people are contacting us directly, asking about whether they might be a good candidate for Backdrop. We have it as a service on our website only in so much as I've talked about it on our blog, on our website, and about the successes that we've seen. I think that, this is the very kind of initial steps of a Backdrop process for us if we were to kind of build it into an Atten process or Atten service offering. But that seems very, very possible and very viable to me.
So of the people that are coming asking for it, what percentage of them are Drupal 7 sites? Is it like 100% Drupal 7 sites? They're coming and looking at Backdrop as an alternative, or is it like, hey, I need a new website, I heard about this Backdrop thing, or is it
are they existing Backdrop sites looking for support and maintenance?
Yeah.
There's going to be some of those soon.
Yeah, all good questions. Right now, 100% Drupal 7.
Okay.
I think we would certainly be interested in kind of all fields, but what's most attractive to people, like you mentioned earlier, John, is the cost is such a big thing. It's such a big deal to say that, if you could spend $100 or $15 for the same end result, which one do you pick? And what's interesting about that is that not everybody's answer is 15. There are Joe at Design Group, Director of Accounts, talks about this like value buying. I can't remember the term of it, but when you go to the store and you're looking for a corkscrew, do you buy the cheapest or the most expensive? And I can tell you honestly, from my perspective, I tend to look in the upper 80%. I feel like, if I'm paying $1 for it, it can't be worth much. But a $7 corkscrew, well, that one's probably a little higher quality. And so really, it depends on what kind of a shopper you are. And some people find great value by looking for good deals. And some people, like me, default to, I'll pay in the 80% of what there is, and I'll hope that it's a good deal. And so when you're talking to new clients, a lot of it has to do with that. Are people coming to you thinking like, hey, I want to pay for the top 80? Or are people thinking like, hey, where's the best value? How do I find the best value here? And that directs a lot of how people buy.
Yeah.
As we get towards closing the show, I guess there's one question that we didn't cover in the actual upgrade process I'm curious about. And that is, what was the breakdown of the labor for the upgrade process? Like, and what I mean is, like, how much did you have to port modules from Drupal 7 to Backdrop to keep working? How much did you have to update your own custom code to work with Backdrop? And, what did the data migration look like? I mean, I think if we don't ask that question in a show about, case study, we'd be missing. Because you said there's 10 weeks. What were the 10 weeks of work?
I would say roughly 2, 5, and 4. And I'll 2 weeks, 5 weeks, and 4 weeks. 2, 4, and 3 weeks. So we spent around 4 weeks with modules that were in Drupal 7 that we needed in Backdrop. And I think that there was a total of 17 modules that we had to convert.
Oh, wow.
We did not convert them all into community ready versions. We made them like working for us versions on the majority of those. Some we have begun to release. There's like simple SAML PHP for the single sign-on stuff was a conversion that we did. Encrypt was another one that has some kind of archaic encryption library stuff for Drupal 7 that we needed. But the bulk of the work, the real big chunk of work, was there in modules and contributed modules. The second chunk would be in our own custom code. We had 7 years of code accumulated, and going through that to make all of the little changes necessary. And then the final like 2 weeks or so was the theme, the front end, which there's multiple ways that you can approach that with Backdrop. You can build in their layout system, or you can kind of like, instead of actually defining all of your regions as regions, you can just say like, hey, here's my page and I'm going to use templates, and just drop a template in there. And that's more the direction we took for time saving more than anything else. And I said 10 weeks earlier. And the reason that I said, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, and 2 weeks, which comes up to 9, is because we actually ended up spending about a week there rebuilding tests. So we had a whole bunch of tests, Selenium-driven tests, that we spent a week rebuilding in Cypress, which has nothing to do with Backdrop. So we tell everybody it took 10 weeks, but really it was more like a 9-week process.
You decided to rebuild them in Cypress?
We decided to rebuild them in Cypress.
Cypress is so cool. And we do have a show in Cypress.
It's coming up.
Oh, we're at the end of the show, and now I want to know more.
Well,
I have to
in the next couple of weeks, we have a show about it. So.
Just one thing I don't want to miss. You mentioned data migration in there, and one thing that I'd just love to leave real clear is there actually is no data migration whatsoever with the Backdrop upgrade. So same database in place. The actual upgrade process is just replacing your code base with the Backdrop code base, same database, and then clicking an upgrade button. And there are some schema updates, but by and large, your data is the same, which is one of the really cool things about this is that because your code is backwards compatible with the Drupal 7 API, and because your data structures are the same in the database, some big risks you get with a rebuild of a very complex platform is losing features you forgot you built, or losing solutions you forgot you built because you don't plan to rebuild them in the next one, or corrupting complex data relationships. And those risks are virtually nil in Backdrop. Your data is the same, it's in the database, and your code by default works once it's converted to the Backdrop API.
So was there any work you had to do to convert from, this is making an assumption, I guess, but were you using like features and you convert that to their config system? Were there any gotchas there, or was that also pretty straightforward?
Yeah, so we just export. So once the configuration in the database on the Drupal 7 side is correct, like your features are not overridden, everything looks good on the Drupal 7 side, all that configuration just gets exported as part of the upgrade process into JSON files on the upgrade process. So there's no real conversion. We did things like, views in code. We have, I don't know if you've done this in Drupal 7, but you do like the API implementation and put all your views in code in a module somewhere so that you can track all that stuff. That's a little bit different. Like that, you have to kind of actually copy the code and paste it into a module that converts it to JSON. But it's a 15-minute boring task.
Well, thank you for joining us. Is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know before we close the show?
I don't think so. I think that about Backdrop anyways, we've talked quite a bit about why you might or might not work with it. And otherwise, just thank you so much for making the time, for having me here. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate a minute to talk about some of the work we've been doing.
Great.
Yeah, I think this is really timely. I think a lot of people are thinking about this right now. This is great.
And that Cypress show is coming up, and it's actually with somebody else from Atten. We're going to be talking to Jordan. Yeah. So we're looking forward to that one coming up as well.
Yeah, very cool. That'll be fun too.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or via email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel. If you're interested in show news, Drupal camp updates, local meetups, and Chad's book corner, sign up for our newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. You can learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TV promo.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing that Become a Patron button in the sidebar.
Well, thank you for joining us again, Eric. If our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, what would be the best way to do that?
The easiest email address is eric@aten.io. Aten is just ATEN.
Perfect. And Kathy, looking forward to being with you the next few weeks. If listeners want to get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
Yes, probably Twitter. I'm CT, as in yes, Kathy Thays, on Twitter.
Awesome. And John, if listeners want to get in touch with you?
You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And if you're looking for a change to your career, EPAM's always hiring. So you can find out more about that at epam.com/careers.
And listeners can reach me at NixVan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
See you guys
Thanks,
next week.
everyone.